This video is going to cover everything you need to know about React and authentication. We're going to cover how to sign up and sign in. We're going to cover how to do password resets via email, how to update passwords within an app, how to create authenticated routes, and best of all, tons and tons of best practices you can use to make your authentication workflow better than ever. And if you want to take your React skills to the next level, make sure to check out my full React course, which is linked down in the description below. Let's get started now. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name is Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream project sooner. So if that sounds interesting, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this. Now to get started, I kind of want to give you an overview of everything we're going to create. As you can see, we have this login page. We can log in, we can click forgot password, and then we can sign up. So let's create a new account. We're just going to say test@test.com. Put in a password, for example, just password is fine here. We'll just have this be like test222. We click sign up. That's going to log us into our profile. We now have our email here. We can update our profile. For example, we can change our email to be test333 instead. Click update, and you'll see that that's going to update. If we refresh the page, you'll notice that it keeps us logged in, and we can log out, come over here, test333@test.com, and we type in the correct password, and we can properly log in. Also, we can click forgot password, type in that email, 333@test.com, click reset password, and it'll send us instructions to reset our password into our email. So now let me show you exactly how to do this. The first thing that you're going to want to do is set up Firebase, because we're going to be using Firebase for all of our authentication. If you want to use your own custom authentication server, you can create your own. The code we're going to write on the front end is going to work with any authentication server you want to use. It's super flexible, but for our case, we're going to use Firebase because it's really easy and free. As you can see, I already have the Auth demo right here that I was using for that, but we're just going to create a brand new project, and we can enter in any name that we want. We're just going to say here, Auth test, and we're going to want to have two different environments. We're going to have like a dev environment, so we're going to say, actually, Auth development here, and then we're also going to have a production version, and this is going to keep our site much more secure. So let's create that development version here. We can just click continue. Here it asks us if we want Google Analytics. We don't need this for this project. We can click create project. It's going to take just a couple seconds. It's going to set up everything behind the scenes, and it'll create our project. And the important thing to note, like I said, is you're going to have a production and a development version of this. So everything you do on the development version, you also need to do on the production version to make sure that they're both in sync with each other. So there we go, that's complete. Let's click continue. And here we are. And the very first thing that we want to do, since we're going to be dealing with authentication, is over on the left-hand side, there's this authentication tab. Click on that, and it's going to bring us to our auth section. You can see we have no users yet. We need to go to our sign-in methods, and we want to enable all of the sign-in methods that we want. As you can see, there's tons of different ways to sign in. For ours, we're just going to use email password because I find that the easiest for most people, and that's most likely what you're going to use on your website. Just click that we want to enable this at the top, click save, and now we already have email authentication set up. And I'm going to show you the reason why we actually use a development and production server here. Is as you can see down here, we have authorized domains, so we can make requests to this Firebase, authentication server using localhost or this URL, which is the URL for our current project. And the reason we have a production version and a development version is the development version, we want to have localhost be allowed, but on our production version, we're going to delete localhost so that way other people can't access our production Firebase from their localhost and possibly, create malicious accounts. So now the next thing I want to do is create that, production version. So we'll just go back to Firebase here. We have our development. Let's come in here and we'll say auth production, and then we can click continue. We don't need Google Analytics, and we'll create this project. Now that that's finished up, we can just click continue here. Do the exact same things we go into authentication. We're going to want to click on sign-in methods, and we want to make sure that we enable email and password. And the important thing, since this is our production environment, we're going to get rid of this localhost here because we don't want people to be able to access this through localhost. So now it can only be accessed through our own server. So now that we have that configured, let's go back into our development version here because we need to get all of the different API keys that we're going to be using to interact with this. In order to do that, let's go over to this project overview tab on the left. And here we can say that we want to add a web app. So we'll click on web, and we can name this anything that we want. For example, we can just say auth development. Doesn't really matter what you name this. And we can also set up hosting from Firebase if we want. I'm just going to skip this step. We'll just click register app here. And then once that loads, you can see down here we have a bunch of different configuration settings that we need to copy into our application. And you're going to want to use your own configuration settings here because I'm going to be deleting this account after I'm done, so none of these actual keys will work for you. So make sure you use your own config settings when you're setting this up. So now that we have that done, let me just push this over to the side here so that we can use this. And on the left-hand side of my screen, I have Visual Studio Code open, and all I've done is run the boilerplate create React app. As you can see, I haven't changed anything in here at all. And the very first thing I want to do is set up a file that's going to contain all these configurations for us. And an easy way to do that with React is to set up an env file. So we can say .env.local, and these are going to be all of our local environment variables that we don't want to push to our server because we don't want them inside of our actual version control. So they're going to stay locally here and not actually go to our version control, which means we can use all of these different development keys here. So let's just make sure we set up values. And when you're setting up environment variables in React, they all must start with React_app, and then we can put whatever else we want under here. So we can say, for example, Firebase API key equals, and then we're just going to copy this API key over. We're going to do the exact same thing for our auth domain. So we can say React app. There we go. That's everything we need inside this env variable file done. Now we can go into the source here. Let's create a new file called firebase.js, and this is where we're going to set up Firebase. But in order to do that, we actually need to install the library Firebase. So we can just say npm I Firebase, and that's going to install Firebase for us. Now that that's finished installing, let me just widen our screen here. We can import Firebase. So we can import Firebase from, Firebase/app. And then we also want to import the authentication. So we can say import Firebase/auth. And this is going to be the authentication module for Firebase so that we can actually do this login sign up stuff. Now what we can do is actually create an app. So we'll say const app is equal to Firebase.initializeApp. And this is where we're going to put all these different config values in here. So I'm just going to copy this. And instead of hard coding all of these strings, as you can see here, what I want to do is I want to change this to process.env.react_app Firebase API key, just like that. So for each one of these, I'm going to replace this hard-coded value with the value from our env file. Let me just delete all these here. There we go. And then we want process.env. And then we want the actual name of each one of these. So I'm just going to copy it straight from this environment file here. So we have our auth domain is our very next one. Get the database URL. We're going to be getting our project ID, our storage bucket, our messaging here, and then finally this app ID. And again, the reason that we're doing this inside of an env file is that way when we're developing, we can use all of these development environment variables. And when we go and push this to production, we can set this up to use our production environment variables without changing any of our code. So it's really easy to switch between instances. Now, in order to use this app everywhere else, let's just make sure we export this as the default. And also, we're going to export a variable for authentication. So we'll say const auth, which is equal to app.auth. And this is a function, so we just call this, and this gives us our authentication instance. So we have auth, and we also have just Firebase in general to use everywhere in our application. So now that we have Firebase set up, we can actually start using it to do authentication. So let's actually start creating our first component for signing up. And in order to do that and make our styles look good, we're just going to use Bootstrap. So we can say npm I Bootstrap, and we also want to get Bootstrap React. So we can say React Bootstrap here. So we want to install Bootstrap and React Bootstrap so we can actually do nice styling. And I also want to start by getting rid of a bunch of these files we don't need. We don't need any of these CSS or test files. So let's just get rid of all of those. Then in our index here, let's make sure we get rid of all this service worker information, get rid of the service worker and the CSS. And then inside of our app here, we're just going to get rid of everything. And we're just going to return the text, hello world, just so we have something printing out to our screen, get rid of the logo and get rid of the CSS. And also I'm going to create a folder called components. I'm just going to drag our app into here and make sure inside of our index, we update this to be ./components/app. And now if we just say npm start here, we should get our application popping up over here on the side of our screen. If we just close out of these other two tabs, we don't really need them open right now. Give this a second, you can see we get the text hello world. So now we have the basics of our React application set up and running. We have Firebase set up, Next thing to do, like I said, is that signup component. So let's create our signup component. So just say signup.js, and we'll just type in RFC, hit enter. That'll generate this boilerplate for you. If you have the ES7 React Redux GraphQL React Native snippets, highly recommend you download this extension. It's super useful. So now that we have that done, inside of here, we're going to want to be using Bootstrap. So let's just import the card from Bootstrap. So we'll say from React Bootstrap, and we're also going to be using a form on this page and a button. So let's just make sure we get all of those imported for now. So inside of our signup, let's get started here. We're just going to return a fragment here because we're going to want to have a card, which is going to contain all of our login information. And then underneath of that card, we're just going to put a div that's going to swap us over to that login page. So we can say class name here is equal to W100. We want it to span the full width. We want to center the text here. And we want to space it out from our card a little bit. And inside of here, we'll just say already have an account, ? And then this is where we're going to put our link to login. I'm just going to type the text login for now because we're not actually setting up the link because we don't have routing in our application yet, but that's where this will go when we get to that point. We just don't have that component yet. Now inside of our card here, let's open up our card.body. And inside of the body, the very first thing I want is just to put a nice big header. We'll do a giant H2. This H2 is just going to say, whoops, sign up, just like that. And let's just give it a little bit of a class here. Say class name. And this is just going to be, whoops, text, center. And we want to put some margin on the bottom just to space it out from all of the form content inside of our header here. And speaking of that, let's move on to our form. And here we go. Inside of the form, we're going to need to have an email field, a password field, and then a password confirmation field. So we're going to first do a form.group. And inside of this group, we're going to give this an ID here of email, because this is going to be our email group. And we want to have a label. And this label is going to be for email. So we'll say email. And we're also going to want to have our control. So form.control. This will have just a type of email. And we're going to make sure that this is required. And we can close that off. And another important thing is this is going to have a ref. We're just going to use refs for this. So we'll say email ref. This is so we can actually get the value when we actually need to submit our form. So there we go. We have that done. Let's just copy this down a couple times because we're going to have one for our password. And this is just going to say password. And the type here is password. And of course, this is a password ref. There we go. And down here, this is going to be password confirm. Here, we're going to say password confirmation, type of password, and this is going to be our password confirmation ref. So password confirm ref. There we go. And that's pretty much everything we need for this form just by default. So let's save this here. Actually, we should probably put the button on this form as well. So we're going to have a button with a type of submit. This is just going to say sign up. And let's just make sure we have a class name on here, which is just going to be W100. Whoops, W100. That'll make this button span the entire width of the page. So now with that done, we have our button created, we have our form created. Let's render this inside of our app. So here, instead of hello world, we'll just say sign up, self-close this. There we go. And now, while it's compiling, it should hopefully render up over here. And of course it didn't. And that's because these refs don't exist, obviously. So let's create those refs. From React, we're just going to import use ref, and we're going to create those refs. So we have a email ref, whoops, email ref, use ref, and we're just going to copy this down because we're going to have one for password, and we're going to have our password confirm. Now, hopefully those errors are going to go away, and you can see we have our email, our password, password confirmation, our sign up button, and then this link down here. But none of our styles are being applied. So in our index.js, we need to make sure we import Bootstrap. So we can say bootstrap/dist/css/bootstrap.min.css. Now, if we save, you should see all the Bootstrap styles we're going to be applied. And there we go. We have our sign up form. Now, in order to make this sign up form look a little nicer so it doesn't span the full width and so it's actually centered in our page, we can go into our app. And instead of just having our sign up component here, we're actually going to render a little bit extra. First thing we're going to render is a container. So we can say container, put the sign up inside of here, and let's make sure we import that. So we're going to import container, and we're going to get that from React Bootstrap. And this container here is going to have a few classes on it. So we'll say class name. We're going to put the Flexbox class on here. And we're going to align our items in the center. That's going to give us that vertical centering. We're going to justify our content in the center, which is going to give us that horizontal centering. And then in order to make sure it spans the full height, what we want to do here is just have a style. And this style is just going to say min height is equal to, whoops, not equal to, it's going to be 100 VH. Now, if we save this, you should see that now this is looking all right, but of course it's side by side because of that display flex. So again, we're going to wrap this inside of another div. This one's going to have a class name of W100, just so it spans the entire width. And then we're going to give it a max width. So we're just going to say here, a style is going to have a max width, which is going to be 400 pixels. We don't want it to be any wider than 400 pixels. Close that off, and then we'll put our sign up inside of here. And now if we save, you can see that even if this page gets wider and wider, this will never be larger than 400 pixels wide. And as you can see, when our screen gets small enough, it just shrinks down with a nice padding on the side, which is exactly what we want. So now that this is looking really good, we can actually move on and set up our authentication. And in order to set up all of the authentication for our app, we're going to be using a context because we want to be able to access our current user anywhere in our application. So let's create a new folder called contexts. And inside of this context folder, we're going to create a context called auth context.js. And we're going to use that same RFC trick just to get the boilerplate set up for us. But we don't want this to be a default export. We're just going to make this a normal export. And it's actually going to be called auth provider. So now from here, what we need to do is just create an auth context, which is going to be equal to react.createContext. And what we want to do is use this context inside of our provider. So we can say auth context.provider, and we want to return that like this. And we're going to take in children inside of our auth provider, and we're going to render them out inside of here. And if you're a little bit confused by this pattern that I'm using, I have an entire video tutorial covering context exactly like this. So I'll link that in the cards and description down below. Lastly, we're going to create another function that allows us to use this context. So we'll say use auth. This is just going to return use context of this auth context. And let's just make sure we import use context from React. So now we have access to our auth context through this use auth hook, and we have our auth provider down here, which is going to be returning a value. And this value is going to contain all of our information that we want to provide with our authentication. So we'll say const value is equal to an object, and inside of here we want to store a current user. That's going to be the main thing we want inside of here. And we're going to handle that with state. So we'll say const current user and set current user is equal to use state. And by default, we're just going to have no user at all, so it'll be completely empty. And let's import use state. So now that we have our auth provider set up where we have a current user and we're returning that inside this provider to use anywhere in our application, we actually need to set it up so this current user actually is set to the current user, because right now this doesn't do anything. So we're going to use Firebase to do that. So let's import that auth module from Firebase that we just created. So we can say // Firebase. That's this Firebase file here. We have that auth module. And inside of our auth context, we're going to use that auth module to log in a user. So let's create a function called login. This is going to take an email and a password. And actually, instead of login, this is going to be sign up, which will take an email and a password. And inside of here, we're going to say auth.create user with email and password. And here we just pass in the email and the password. And this is going to return a promise, which we're going to return when we can actually use this inside of our sign up here to make sure that this actually worked successfully. So we can give an error message if there's a failure or redirect the user to the correct page. So here we go. We have our sign up done completely. And you'll notice we're not actually setting the user when we're creating them. And that's because Firebase actually has its own way to notify you whenever the user gets set. There's a method here called auth.onAuthStateChanged. And this is going to take in a user. And what it's going to do is it allows us to set the user from here. So this will either be the current user or it'll be null. So we could say set current user to this user. And now we have our user being set. So whenever we call this create user with email and password, it's going to call set current user and actually set that user for us. It's important to note though that we don't want this to be inside of our render. We want this to be in a use effect because we only want to run this when we mount our component. So we're going to say use effect, come down here, put this inside of a use effect so it only runs once. And we'll make sure to do that by putting in the empty parentheses here for an empty array. And we also want to make sure we unsubscribe from this whenever we're done. So we can say const unsubscribe equals auth on, state change here. And the reason that we get this unsubscribe here is because this function actually returns a method that when we call this method, it'll unsubscribe this on auth state changed event. So we can just say return unsubscribe, and this is going to unsubscribe us from this listener here whenever we unmount this component, which is exactly what we want. So now in order to use this signup, let's just pass that as part of our context here. So now we have our signup and our current user. And inside of our signup, we can just import that use auth, which we got from that /contexts/auth context. And we can just say const signup is going to be equal to use auth. So we're just pulling that signup function directly from this auth context here, so we can actually use that as part of our form. So we can say function handles submit is going to take in an event. We just want to prevent the default to prevent our form from refreshing, just like that. And then we can call that signup function, and we're going to pass in our email and our password. So we'll say email ref.current.value and the password ref.current.value. And that's actually going to do the signup for us, but we want to make sure we actually check to see if this was successful or a failure. Also, you'll notice we're getting this error over here. That's because we need to make sure we wrap everything inside of that auth provider. So we'll say auth provider, and we're just going to wrap everything inside of that so we have access to that context, and just make sure we import that up here. That got rid of that error for us, which is what we want. So now inside of our signup, let's do all of our different validation checks. The first thing I want to do is I want to see if our two passwords are even the same. So password ref.current.value is equal to password confirm ref.current.value. I want to see if these are not equal to each other, because that means that we have some form of error, they're not equal. So we can just return, and we want to set an error. So let's create a new state, const error, and set error is equal to use state, and we're just going to have empty string here because we're not going to have an error by default. So we can say that we want to set our error to something along the lines of passwords do not match, just so the user knows the passwords they entered don't match. And the reason we're returning here is because we don't want to continue to do the signup. We want to just exit out of the function immediately because there was an error. Now what we can do is we can just set up a try catch for this signup here, because this is an asynchronous event. So if we do an async function, we can just await this, and then it'll wait for the signup to finish. And if there's a failure, it'll go into this catch block here where we can set our error. So we can just say failed to create an account, just like that. And then of course, we just want to make sure that before we try anything, we want to set our error back to an empty string so that we have no error. And also we want to set up a loading state, so that way when we're actually signing up the user, we disable this button down here so they don't automatically keep clicking the button and accidentally create multiple accounts at the same time. That would be very bad. So we'll say set loading to true, and then after everything is done, we're going to set loading to false. And this is going to occur after it's done waiting for the signup. That's why it's down here after this try catch. So let's create that state for loading, and we'll do set loading. And of course, by default, we're not loading at all, so we're going to set that to false. So now let's use this handle submit as the on submit for our form. So we'll say on submit is equal to handle submit. Down here in our button, we're going to set our disabled state equal to loading, because if we're currently loading, we don't want to be able to resubmit our form. And then lastly, up here, what I want to do is I just want to put a nice little error. So we'll say if we have an error, then I want to render out an alert, one of those Bootstrap alerts. I want this to be the variant of danger, since this is an error. And I just want this to have the text error inside of it, just like that. Let's make sure that we import alert up here, save this, and luckily nothing's errored out over here. So let's see if this works. Let's just type in a random email. We're going to type in a password here and a password here, but they're going to be different passwords. So we should get that nice error. So we click sign up, it says passwords do not match. That's exactly what we want. Now let's try to make passwords that do match. So we'll just say 123456. 123456, click sign up, and you can see that we got no error, which means that hopefully this worked properly. The only way to check this is to see if we have a currently signed in user. So let's just get the user here from our auth context as well. We'll get our current user. This is just temporary to see if this worked. And inside of here, we're just going to render out our current user down here. And if we save, you should notice that of course we're getting an error. Let's make sure we JSON.stringify this because this is an object. We need to return a string for React. And as you can see, we have this huge JSON object for our current user. And what we could do is just get our email. So we could say current user.email, save that, and we should get the email that we signed up with. And of course it says cannot read property email of undefined. This is actually super important to understand. Our current user, when we refresh our page, is actually null. So let's just make sure we do and current user.email. That's just making sure there is a current user, and then it's checking to get the email. And as you can see, that's the email we signed up with. Now you may be wondering how the current user starts out as null and then sets itself. And the way that happens is that Firebase actually sets local storage for you, sets tokens, so that way it can verify that if you have a user already signed in, it'll connect that user for you, and it'll use this on auth state changed. But that means that you have an initial loading state that you have to worry about. So here we're going to have another property called set loading. We're just going to set this to false, for example. I'm sorry, yeah, false here. Whenever we actually have a user, when this changes, it means we're done loading. And initially, we're going to set that state here of loading and set loading. We're going to set that to a use state of true. So by default, we're loading. And as soon as we get this first use effect that runs, that means it did the verification to see if there is a user. Then we're going to set our loading to false. And down here, what we want to do is a simple little check to see if we are loading, because otherwise we don't want to run this. So we'll say loading and children. We want to say if we're not loading, then we render out the children. Otherwise, we don't want to render the children. Let's just do a nice little indentation here, save this. And now what will happen is we can go back into our signup. We can get rid of this and check here, because what's going to happen is, of course, we're going to get an error. The reason for that is we just need to make sure we set our user before we set loading. Now, if we save, there we go, we don't get any more error. And the reason for this is that what's happening is we're making sure that we don't render any of our application until we have our current user being set for the very first time. And if we have no current user, obviously this is going to fail because the current user doesn't exist, but that's okay. We don't actually want this code here. This is just for testing purposes. So we'll get rid of that current user code here, save this again, and we essentially have a completely working sign up page. But we don't have any type of routing yet. We want to be able to route between our sign up page, our login page, our dashboard where the signed in user goes. So let's work on that now by using React Router. In order to install React Router, we can just come over here, say npm I react router DOM. That'll install React Router for the web. And while that's working, what we can do is go back over to Firebase on our demo or our development project. As you can see here, inside of the Authentication tab for our users, that user that we created is right here. So whenever we create a user, we can see them directly inside of this Authentication tab, so we can really easily verify this is working. The other nice thing is that this development environment is completely separate from production, so this user doesn't even exist in production. It's only in our development environment. So now we have that router set up. Let's go back over here, back into our application, and let's set up routing for our application. In order to do that, we need to get our router, which is going to be called browser router. We're just going to rename this to router so it's easier to work with. We're going to need a switch to be able to determine which page we're currently on, and a route to determine which route on the page we're going to. And that's coming from, of course, React Router DOM. Just like that. So now we're going to be doing this all inside of here. So inside of the container, inside of our auth provider, inside of this div here, let's set up a router. And what this router is going to have is actually our auth provider inside of it. I just find that easier to work with. So we'll put our auth provider inside of here. There we go. And then inside of this auth provider, we're going to have a switch. And this switch essentially determines which route we're currently on. So let's create our signup route here. So we can say route, and this route has a path, which is equal to /signup. And this is going to have a component, which is going to be that sign up component. We can close off that route. We can get rid of this sign up here. And if we save immediately, our application is going to be empty. But if we go to /signup, hit enter, you're going to notice we're on the sign up page. So now we have that routing set up. Let's also create another route, which is going to be for the dashboard of our user. So we can just create a route here. This is going to be an exact route with a path of /. And the reason we do exact here is that way it'll only match this / path, essentially an empty path. Otherwise, without exact, it would essentially be every path would match this because everything starts with /. But in our case, we just want only the things that are exactly /. So that's why we do exact. And this component here is going to be a component which we'll call dashboard. And we don't have this created yet. So let's create a simple component called dashboard.js, do our little RFC trick inside of here, and we'll just say dashboard on this page. Now if we come over here, save, we're of course getting an error because we need to import that dashboard from /dashboard. Now that should be there. And if we go to localhost 3000/, you can see that we're on the dashboard page. Obviously, we don't want to be able to access the dashboard page right away though. We're just on our sign up page to start. Now, before we get too carried away with the dashboard page, let's get started on our login page here. So we'll say login, and the component will be a login component, which we'll create now, login.js, just like that. And inside of our app, let's make sure we import that. So we'll say down here, import login from /login. So now we have our login component at /login. And if we go to /login, you'll see nothing gets rendered because our login component has nothing inside of it. If we save this, you'll see it's just an empty page. So our login component is actually going to be very similar to our signup component. I'm actually going to copy our entire signup component into our login component and just make sure up here we change this to login instead of signup. We don't need this password confirmation, so we'll get rid of that. We can get rid of this password confirmation check here. And then this final form group for password confirmation, we can obviously get rid of. Let's change this button to say log in. We want to change the title of this to say log in. And if we save this, we hopefully should see that our login page is looking very similar to how our signup page was, but more geared towards login. And down here, we can also change this to say need an account. Oops, if I could spell that right. And this is where we're going to put our sign-in link. So we're going to say link. This is going to come from React Router to /signup. And we want it to have the text sign up. So let's just make sure we import that from React Router. Import link from React Router. And now we should have a link down here to go to our signup page. We click it and it brings us to our signup page. That's exactly what we want. Let's do the same thing in our login down here. We're going to create, in our signup, we're going to create a link that's going to go to /login. And it's going to have the text login inside of it. And we just need to make sure that we import link from React Router DOM. So now we can click login, go to our login page, click sign up, go to our sign up page. So now let's implement the login page because right now it's doing the sign up logic. We want this to call a login method. We also want this error method to say here, failed to sign in. So now let's create this login, which is going to be inside of our use auth. So inside of our auth context, we have our signup function. Let's create another function called login, which is going to again take an email and a password. And it's going to return auth.sign in with email and password. And again, we just pass it the email and password. So now we have our login function done. Let's export that right here. And the nice thing about this, like I said, it's very modular. If you don't want to use Firebase, all you have to do is change this login function to log to your server, for example. You just change it in this one spot and the rest of your application will work just fine. So you can do this completely fine without Firebase. All you'd have to do is change this one function and this one function here for signup. So now with that done, we should be able to log in properly. So let's create a new user first so we know exactly what their email is. We'll say ttt@ttt.com. Password is just password and password. We click sign up. Of course, we got failed to sign in. Let's just try that again to see if that works. We'll click sign up. And of course, we got another failed to sign in. Let's just see what the error is. We go to the console. It says failed to load resources to respond with a 400 status. And let's just go to our network tab here. Click that sign up button again. We come down here and it's saying email not found. So it's trying to log us in. So clearly what we did is we changed our sign up to be doing login. Yep, that's exactly what we did. So we want this to still be our sign up. And it looks like, yeah, we changed, just this. So this should stay sign up. This should be sign up. We just changed the wrong section here. This should be failed to create an account. There we go. And now in our login, this is where we want to do the login function, failed to log in and log in up here. So now we should be able to create an account. .com, password, sign up, and we didn't get any error, so we're most likely signed in. Now if we go over to login, we could type in, this authentication, put in the correct password, click login, And of course we get no error. If we type in a wrong password, click login, you'll see we get an error because this account doesn't exist. So now what we want to do is when we log in or when we sign up, we want to redirect ourselves to the dashboard. And again, this is fairly easy to do with React Router. We just need to use history. It's a nice hook we can use. And we can get history from this used history hook. So we'll say use history. And all we can do after we're done logging in, if it was successful, we could just say history.push/. And this is going to bring us to that dashboard page. We can do the exact same thing in our signup, history.push/. Make sure we get history, is equal to use history. And we're going to import that up here from this React Router DOM. So now if we log in our user, ttt@ttt.com, password, click login, you see it redirected us to the dashboard because we successfully logged in as the current user. So now what I want to do is actually make this dashboard a little bit more functional. Right now it just says dashboard. That's pretty useless. So again, we're going to use Bootstrap for this. We're going to get the card component from React Bootstrap, just like that. And inside of here, what we want to do is render out a fragment. And inside this fragment, we're going to have our card at the beginning, just like this. And then underneath our card, we're going to use that same div trick we did from the login. As you can see this div down here, we're going to copy this exactly over into our dashboard. And this is going to be for logging out. So let's just get rid of all this extra text. This is just going to be a button, which we're going to get from Bootstrap. And this button inside of here is just going to say log out. We want it to look like a link, so we're going to say variant is link. And on click is going to be equal to handle logout. And we don't have this, function done yet. We're just going to create it up here. Function handle logout, just like that. It's going to be blank for now, so we'll implement this in a little bit. Now inside of our card, we're going to set up our card.body. And again, we're going to have a very similar header to what we did inside of all of our other pages. So let's just copy this header over, just like this. And instead of saying login, this is going to say profile. Also, we're going to have this same thing for error. We're going to paste this here. This is for handling in case our logout fails up here. So we're going to have an alert that logs out our error here. And of course, let's make sure we get this use state hook so we can use that. So const error set error equal to use state. And it's going to be an empty string by default. There we go. Alert is not defined. Let's make sure we import that as well. Alert. And there we go. We have our profile, pretty empty right now, and we have our logout button, which does nothing yet. Now, lastly, inside of our body, let's put here our email. We'll just put this inside of a strong tag. We'll say email. And what we're going to do is print out the current user.email. Put our spacing in there properly. And in order to get our current user, we're going to get that from that use auth hook. So we're going to get that from auth, /context/auth context. And we can say that our current user is equal to use auth. There we go. Now if we save, you can see our email, and we have the email of the current user that we're signed in with. Lastly, I want to just create a link to update our profile. So we'll say here, we're going to have a link, and this link is going to be going to /update profile link, just like that. Class name is going to be a button, and this is a primary button, and we want it to fill the entire width. So we'll say here, W100, and margin top is going to be 3, just a little bit of space, and we'll say update profile. And of course, we need to import link. So we'll get that from React Router. And if we save, you can see we have our update profile button. Right now, there's nothing on this page. That's perfectly okay. We're going to implement that later. Let's work on our logout though. This is much more important. So to do logout, we're going to get this from our use auth, just like everything else, because that way, if we want to replace Firebase with something else, we can easily do that by just changing these few functions. So we'll say function logout. It doesn't need to take an email or anything. All we need to do is say auth sign out. And let's just make sure we return this because it's a promise. That's all there is to logging out. And all we need to do is make sure down here, we render out our logout inside of our context. Now what we can do, we go back over into our dashboard. We can handle this logout by first setting error. This is just clearing out our error. And then we can do a simple try catch, where if we do have an error, we set our error to be equal to failed to log out. And otherwise, what we can do here is await our logout function, logout. There we go. So it's just going to wait to see if it finishes. And if it does finish, we're going to do that history.push trick again. Whoops, push. And we're going to push us to the /login page. So up here, let's get use history. And we're going to get const history is equal to use history. And there we go. Cannot, keyword await. We're trying to await this instead of a function. It needs to be an async function. There we go. Now we can click logout, and you can see it logged us out and returned us to this logout page. But immediately you'll notice something. It says cannot read property email of null. It's trying to render out our dashboard here. Even though we're on the login page, React Router is trying to render out this dashboard. And the reason that it's trying to render out this dashboard is just because of how React Router works. But something interesting is if we try to go to our dashboard up here, we're logged out currently, yet we're able to still access our dashboard. We don't want this. We want to get redirected to the login page. So in order to do that, we need to change this from a normal route to a private route. So let's create our own custom class here, our own component for private route.js. Do that RFC trick here. And with this private route, really all we want to do is create a wrapper for our current route. And all we want to do is get the component from that. We'll rename it to capital C component. Otherwise, all of the rest of the properties are going to be here. So this is just a wrapper for our current route. And in order to get route, we're going to need to, of course, import that route. And we need to get that from React Router DOM. And down here inside of a return, we're going to be returning our route. Because like I said, this private route is just a wrapper around the current route. And this route is going to take all the rest of these props as if it was normally being passed to route. The only thing that's different is render. We're going to define our own render. This render takes in props. And what it's going to do here is check to see if we have a current user. And to do that, we of course need that use auth hook that we created. And this is coming from /context/auth context. So we can get our current user, which is going to be equal to use auth. And down here, we can say, if we have a current user, then we just want to render out the component that we got passed into our class. So we'll say component, and we're going to pass it all of these props. Otherwise, if we don't have a current user, we obviously don't want to render a current user. We don't want to render this component because it's a private component. So we want to redirect our user, and we're going to get that redirect here from React Router. So redirect. We're going to redirect them to the login page. So we'll say /login and close that off. So now if we actually use this private route inside of our dashboard here, so we'll replace this with a private route, and we'll import private route from /private route, save that. And of course, we're getting an error in our private route. And that's just because we need to make sure we return this statement here. Now, if we save, you can see that if we tried to go to just localhost 3000, click enter, it's redirecting us back to the login page because we're not currently logged in. So we can't go to the dashboard. So we've now locked down this dashboard route by just making this simple private route here. Now, the next thing that I want to work on is our forgotten password section. In our login, we should have a little link down here that lets us go to a forgot password page. So we can come down here below our form. We're going to create a div. This div is just going to essentially be the exact same as this div here. That way it's going to be just spaced out a little bit. We'll just use margin top 3 though for this one. So we have a nice little div which is going to contain our link to our forgot password page. So we'll say link to, and this is going to do to forgot password. And we're just going to have the text forgot password ? We save that. You can see we got a nice little forgot password link down here. We click it and we go to /forgot password. So let's create a route for that. We can say forgot password, and our component is going to be forgot password, which we can create now. Forgot password.js, RFC, and in our app, let's just make sure we import forgot password from /forgot password. So now we're on that forgot password component. If I just render something in this div, click save, you can see it popped up here. And inside this forgot password, you guessed it, it's going to be very similar to all of our other sections. So let's just copy login for now into forgot password and change a few of our names. Here, this should say forgot password, just like that. And we don't need any password information. So we're going to get rid of our password ref, get rid of this password group down here. We're going to change this login button to say reset password. We don't need this link here for forgot password, but we do want a link that's going to go back to our login page. So we'll say login, just like that. Keep all of this the same, just change this from forgot password to login. And down here, we'll keep this sign up section complete. Now, if we save this, you can see password ref is not defined. Let's just see where we're using password ref. It looks like it's probably up here. That's correct. We can just comment this out because we're going to replace this in a little bit. So now we can save. You can see it still says login. Let's say forgot, or we'll say password reset. There we go. There we go. And we got our email, enter our reset password, and we can go to the login page from here. We can go to our sign up page from here. So we can get to all of our different pages as we need to. Now let's actually set up this section to actually do our password forget. And of course, we need to do that in our auth context. So we'll say function reset password. And this is going to take in an email for the email we want to reset the password for. And luckily, just like all of our other auth, this is as easy as saying return auth.reset send password reset email. Pass in the email here. And down here, we just need to make sure we expose that reset password function inside of all of our different components. So here we can get that reset password function. And instead of saying here that we want to log in, we can await our reset password and pass in the email. Now, one of the main things that's different about those though, is I don't want to change our page when we reset our password. So we're going to get rid of this history.push, get rid of history and get rid of use history. But instead what I want to do, also I want to say failed to reset password. And instead what I want to do here is I want to set a message. This is going to be like a success message saying, check your inbox for further instructions. There we go. Our loading can be set to true here. Our error can be set. And we also want to reset our message to an empty string as well, which is just going to be some state we create up here. So we'll create a new state called message and set message, just like that. And it says email is not defined. This is coming from our email ref.current.value. There we go. So now whatever we type in here, we click reset password. And if this is an email, you see, of course, it says failed to reset password because we don't have any user with this email. So let's create a new user with an email, and we can actually get a temporary email. In order to do that, we can just use a site called temp mail, for example. This gives us a temporary email to use. So we can just copy this over, go over to our forgot password page, paste in that temporary mail. And well, actually first we need to sign up with that email. So we'll say sign up, type in our password, click sign up. There we go. We've created our user. Let's log out. Let's say, oh, I forgot my password. I wonder what it could be. We'll click reset password here. And if we go over to our temp mail, you can see we got an email for resetting our password. We open this up. It gives us a link, which we can click on. And then we can type in a new password. We'll say 123456, click save. Now it says I can sign in with the new password. So if I go into our application and I try to log in with that email, which of course I don't remember, let's just get that from here. Copy that, paste that email in, 123456, click login, and now I'm logged in as that user with that brand new password. Now the very last thing that we have left to do is just to show the message to the user to say that the email is being sent. This is just going to look just like this. We can say message. We want this to be a success and message. So now if I log out, let's just copy this email again. Log out, forgot password, hit reset password. You can see it says check your inbox for further instructions for resetting our password. So let's finally create another user. We'll say tt@tt.com, password, sign up. So now we're signed in as this current user. And now we want to be able to update our profile, which right now we don't have a page for. So let's create a simple component called update profile.js. We can do that RFC trick, paste that in. There we go, save that. And in our app, we're going to create a private route for this because we only want to do this if we're logged in. This is that /update profile. We don't need this to be exact. And we can change our component here to be update profile. and just make sure we import that up here. So now we have our update profile route. If we were to put some text in here, it should be rendered out. There we go, that text is showing up. And just like all of our other routes, let's just copy this directly from our login. Actually, we're going to copy this from our signup because they're very similar. We'll go to our update profile, paste it in, and up here, we're going to say update profile. We need to make sure here that we're getting our current user from our auth. So we'll say current user, just like that, because we're going to use that down below. Our handle submit, we're just going to kind of comment everything out in here for now because we don't want this to actually do anything yet. And now down here, we can say update profile. We can come in and say that our email is going to be a default value of our current email. So we can say current user dot email. We can also come down here with our passwords and we can give them a placeholder that just says leave blank to keep the same. We're just going to put this on both of our password controls. That way, if they don't actually want to change their password, they just leave it blank and it won't change. And there we go. We have our default email and then the placeholder here. If we leave our password blank, it won't update. Lastly, let's make sure we change this button to say update. And then down here, instead of having this say already have an account, we're just going to make this say cancel. And it's going to redirect us back to the dashboard. So if we click cancel, we go back to the dashboard and we can click update profile to come back to here. So now all we need to do is actually implement this up here inside of this handle submit. So let's uncomment all of this and let's figure out how to get started. The very first thing that I want to do is I want to check to see if our passwords are not equal. I'll set this error. This is going to be exactly the same. If we enter a password here and I click update and I enter a password here and click update, I want to make sure that if they're different, I get an error. So if I save this and make sure to comment out this sign up section because we're not actually using sign up. And now if I type in a password here and a password here that's different, click update, it says passwords do not match. Also, I want to make sure this required field is not on our passwords. We don't want them to be required. That way, if I type in and I can leave one of these blank, for example, it still says passwords do not match. Now, the next thing that I want to do is be able to update our email and update our password. So in our auth context, let's create functions for doing that. We'll say function update email, which takes in a new email. And we'll say function update password, which takes in a new password. And these are both fairly straightforward functions. We can just say auth.current user, and we can actually just say current user.update email, pass in the email, and make sure we return this. And we can do the same thing down here. This is going to say update password, and it's going to take in the password. Because we have to do these individually because of the way that, Firebase works. So now let's get these update email and update password functions exposed. So now inside of our update profile, our auth, we can get the update password and update email functions. And now down here, we can actually use those functions. So what I want to do is I want to create some promises. So we'll say const promises equals an empty array. And then the first thing I want to do is check to see if our email is not equal to our current email. So we'll say not equal to current user.email. So if we've changed our email, I want to add that promise. So we'll say promises.push of update email, and I'll pass in my email ref.current.value. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm calling that update email function with our current email if our email changes, and we're adding this to this array of promises because we want to just do all of these promises and then wait till they all finish before we throw any errors. I'm going to do a very similar thing to see if our password ref.current.value exists. Essentially, if we entered a password, then I want to do the same thing. I want to add a promise here for update password, and I want to get this from our password ref. Then what I can do down here is just say promise.all, pass in our array of promises, and this is going to run a .then function, which is going to run whenever our promises actually execute. So as soon as all these promises finish, our .then will run if they're all successful. So if they're all successful, I just want to redirect it back to the home page. So we'll just say history.push back to the home page. If I can spell it right, there we go. Otherwise, if we have an error, we can say .catch. Inside of this .catch, what we want to do is actually just set our error. So we say set error, failed to update account. And then lastly, we can have a finally. And what this finally is going to do is set our loading back to false. So we just need to set our loading up here to be true. Come up here, set it to true. We need to set our error here to be blank. Just like that, that's our initialization. And then down here in our finally, this runs whether we succeed or fail. We're just going to set our loading back to false. So now if I save that, get rid of all this try catch code down here, and I can even remove this async because this is no longer an async function. Now what I can do is I can say tt2, click update, and of course we got a failed to update account. In order to see what happened, let's just inspect the page here, go to our console, it says 400 error, so let's go to our network tab. Just like that, we're going to re-update and click on this and see what our error is. It says credentials too old, log in again. So let's just try re-logging in here. We'll just log out and we'll log in tt@tt.com. Password is password. Click login. Now let's update to tt2. Click update. And you can see it changed our email to that. We can also change our password to like 123456, 123456. Update. And there we go. Now if I log in, I can say tt2@tt.com. And I want to do the password 123456, click login, and now all of that information has been updated. And that's all it takes to create this full authentication workflow in React. If you enjoyed this video and want to take your React skills to the next level, make sure to check out my full React course linked down in the description below. Thank you very much for watching and have a good day.